When I was growing up, I'm number 6 out of 8 children, and the first 4 kids Dad helped learn how to drive. By that time, he was done. No more patience was left, so Mom taught the last 4 to drive. And one of the first lessons that I remember Mom teaching us about learning to drive a car is how important it is to be aware of the blind spot. That area around the car that you cannot see, an area which might be occupied by someone else. Blind spots don't just happen in driving. We can have blind spots in our personality, things we don't see about ourselves, our work habits. In marriage or parenting, there can be blind spots. There are cultural blind spots, like when we become desensitized to the violence, immoral behavior, the suffering of others, and we begin to think these are just normal, part of everyday life. We become blind. There's also spiritual blind spots that can occur. Maybe, for example, we're doing all the right things. We come to Mass. We spend time in prayer. We read the Bible. But we're blind to the pain of poverty, of injustice, of a respect for the dignity of all life. This blindness, this spiritual blind spot, is the result of selfishness, hatred, prejudice, jealousy, maybe addictions, or simply a hardened heart. In our first reading, Jesse of Bethlehem had a blind spot. When asked to present his sons to Samuel, he failed to think of David, his youngest son, who was considered too young, too inexperienced to be anointed king. But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not judge from appearance or lofty stature. Not as man sees does God see. The Lord looks into the heart." It seems to me we have a national epidemic today. That is a judgmental attitude. It permeates our culture and society. People using the latest 24/7 news feed to measure their judgments of what they think is truth. Not as man sees does God see. In his letter to the Ephesians, St. Paul reminds us that through the waters of baptism, we are now called children of the light. People commissioned to keep the flame of faith alive in our hearts. This means our mission in life is to pursue goodness, righteousness, and truth. And what is the truth we're called to live in? Jesus teaches us, love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. As children of the light, you and I are called to live in a different way in this world, in a way that is not of the world. In biblical times, it was assumed that those who were born blind or crippled or mute were afflicted because of sin in their lives, someone else's life, or in the life of their parents. But Jesus counters that argument, and he uses the healing of the man born blind as a teachable moment. Jesus is the true light of the world, and he uses this miracle, healing the man born blind, to glorify God and to help us see that he truly is the Son of God, the one who makes all things new. In the reading, we heard that Jesus took dust and spit into the dust, and he kneaded that together to make clay. Our minds go back to the book of Genesis to creation, when God took clay from the stream welling up out of the earth, and God formed man, blowing into his nostrils the breath of life. God, who created light out of darkness, will heal the man born blind, taking away his darkness and bathing him in new light. What a gift! And yet, the Pharisees had a blind spot. They said, Jesus sinned by kneading that clay. You're not to work at all on the Sabbath. And then he healed this man on the Sabbath. Both of these laws were against the Jewish tradition. So instead of honoring him as a Messiah, the one who makes the blind see, the lame to walk, the mute to speak, they judged Jesus to be a sinner. From an unlikely source, the man born blind becomes a disciple of Jesus. First seeing Jesus as a man, then seeing him as a prophet, and finally seeing him as the Son of God. Following the instructions of Jesus, he washed in the pool of Siloam, and he left behind his blindness. He now lives in the glorious light of God. He is healed. And I like to think that maybe the words of Psalm 23 came to his mind. Even though I walk in the dark valley, I fear no evil, for you are at my side with your rod and your staff that gives me courage. Abandoned by his neighbors, rejected by his parents, driven out of the temple by the Pharisees, Jesus finds the man healed of blindness, and he invites him to make a profession of faith. Without any hesitation, he says, I do believe, Lord, you are the Son of God. How about you? This week, Jesus asks us to look at the blind spots in our lives. What is the blindness that keeps you from living as a child of the light? For those entering the church this Easter vigil, this time in Lent is a time to move from doubt into belief. For those already baptized, this time for us is to move from the darkness of sin into the light of repentance, mercy, truth, and freedom. What is your blind spot? Ask Jesus to help you to be aware of that. Where have you judged others unworthily? Name your blind spot and bring it to the altar as we bring forth the gifts of bread and wine, and ask Jesus to transform your life so that you can become like the bread and wine, the living presence of Jesus in our world today. You are a child of the light. Be the light of Christ.